Welcome to The Connect. My name is Nora Cheserem. I am a Kenyan Australian. I will say Kenyan Australian who has been based in Australia since 1996. So that's a good 27 years. But I have been inbound and outbound. I came in as a student initially, and I have just recently relocated to Kenya in 2019. And this is my story.
To have you on the channel.
Okay.
And today we just basically want to understand, when you talk about 27 years, that takes us back to
1996.
96.
Yeah.
So what made you come to Australia in the first place?
Okay. So I came to Australia first for education. I'll give a backstory to that. My parents actually worked in Australia. Dad worked in Australia in the late 70s, and he came as an expatriate for about 2 years. And I was actually born in Australia. So they always mention that when you get to the stage where you're going back to university or you're getting into university for the first time, you'd be heading to Sydney because that's where they were based, in Lane Cove. Yeah. So I came for education, and then I stayed on because there was so many opportunities as a young person to work, to travel, to experience this beautiful Southlands known as Australia.
Amazing. How was the study back then in 1996, and what were the challenges then?
Okay. So back then, for me, I can say, as any young person who's leaving home for the first time, I was in boarding school, my 4 years in Nakuru. And so leaving to go overseas was like the coolest thing one could be doing. And it meant independence. It meant a degree of financial freedom, because then I had my own account and I could make my own decisions. And then it gave me a chance to experience something outside of my cocoon of a very conservative Kenyan family. Now, education back then, I went to year 12, which is the equivalent of A-levels back in the day, a school in Corridon in Sydney. And it was, I will call it a culture shock, because I realized in Australia, the education was more for you to learn and then to use your learnings in real life, as opposed to Kenya, where we were studying to get A's, just to get to be top of the class. But in terms of the conversion between what you studied and what you're going to live and do in your career, there was a proper, I can call it a chasm. There was a big divide, a disconnect. Yes. So coming to Australia was, as I said, it was like a rite of passage for me. And I was like, cool, I can handle. High school, I was feeling very isolated. I was the only African in my whole school. And the closest person who could look like me was a Maori lady who I could relate to, but not quite. But then when I finished that, I went into university. It was a little bit easier, because then I met my African family of international students, including students from Southeast Asia. And we have formed lifelong friendships since.
And just having that connection with someone, at least or a community, what did that do to your identity, your self-worth, and your confidence as well?
So I grew up thinking, we were brought up just to know self, to love God, to look out, and people would be looking out at you positively. But coming into Australia, I felt like lost. I would put it that way. I couldn't find a person who could talk to me around where could I have my hair done? Where could I get food that was familiar? Like, I want to have a chapati. Where can I buy the ingredients for that? It made me feel a little bit lost. But the benefit of hindsight, I think, when you're young, because you're open to new opportunities and new experiences, at the first instance, give me a parma and chips, I can roll with it. Or give me a barbecue with sausages that are Australian sausages, and a slice of bread and a lot of tomato sauce. I would roll with it. But then the longer I stayed in Australia, the more I desired for the things I had left back home. And it also made me think, you know what, I have an identity. What is my identity? Can I stand up tall and say, you know what, when I remove my braids, this is what my hair looks like. My skin will never change and my hair will never change, but I can be happy and content in this vessel that God has given me.
Amazing,
Yes.
amazing. And how back then, how was it easy to make friends? Now in stages of uni, maybe.
Okay.
Let's talk about university.
So uni was a little bit more fluid. I would say, first of all, I could make friends from the point of view, like I stayed at a residential hall called Damolang. It was a Christian Anglican hall of residence. So we had a lot of students from either the country or international. And that's where I actually met my first and my oldest friend in Australia, Esther. And she was from Kenya, from Ngong Hills. And so for me, I think because we all didn't have family, we all did not have a connection to a place we could go for Easter or a place we could go for our birthday party, we became each other's family. So in many senses, I think when you're coming into a new space, look for those who are also coming into a new space and create your family. That's how I looked at my transition in my formative years. And then the group grew. It was not only just the Kenyan, it would be Cameroonians, it would be people from Cote d'Ivoire, it would be people from Malaysia, from Singapore. And there were solid people because they have the same values we have in Kenya, which is education, respect for people, and also just the fact that we've been sent out here to study, that we complete the mission for which we were sent. So it was a good cohort of people to hang out with.
Amazing. And I just want to touch on a little bit about social anxiety.
Okay.
And how did you now get yourself to go out there and make friends? Maybe just some tips for someone who's coming in this country and they have social anxiety. They don't know where to start to make friends, or even reach out to the community. What pointers do you have for them?
So in this year, 2023, it's not too hard. We live on social media. It has its pros and it also has its cons. I would say back in the day, social media wasn't a thing, but I used to go to a church that was associated to my residential hall, and there were young people like me who would be like, okay, we're going to hang out at the botanical gardens. Do you want to come along? At university, you join a club that is like, people who do hiking. I love going outdoors. So then you'd have a hiking trip. I would go along with them. And then of the Kenyan community, as long as somebody told you I have a birthday, even if it meant catching 2 buses, I would make a point of catching that bus. I don't know people, but what benefit am I doing sitting in my house, feeling lonely and feeling sorry for myself? I am like, I've come all this way, make the best of it. And back then, I think at the beginning, and I remember this is a comment my friends always made, that I did not befriend the Africans first. My besties, as I would call them, was a lady from the countryside, and I believe a lady who had come from Southeast Asia. Because to me, I just said, just because my skin color was not rife in college back then, didn't mean I did not have an opportunity to make friends. I just looked for people like me who had come in, who are trying to figure out how to enjoy Australia, where to find a beach to hang out at, if we could do shopping, where can we afford to shop, and just spend time with. And that is how I made my connects back in the day.
And in Australia, you've lived here, so it can get very lonely. And after we just finishing off with the university. So to the university students who feel lonely, sometimes depressed, what are some of the resources, or what did you use to get yourself not to get in such spaces?
Okay. Now, I think for me, as I said, I was young. I was like 18, and I just thought, compared to being in Nakuru, I'm in Sydney. And when I came to Australia, and even if I was now, as I am now in Melbourne, I did, I guess, a mental check to think, okay, you know what? I am somebody who didn't grow up to fear stepping out. So I would step out, buy a bus ticket, jump in a bus and go and look at the Opera House or go check out the bridge. But also I remember back in the day, the African community was very small, and the Kenyan community. I think for me, I was thinking about what is familiar, because it's easier to plug into what is familiar. And I would try and check out, do they have a fellowship happening? Or is there like, an international day food festival? I would show up at those events, because for me, I think in life, you can only play a victim for so long. And you have resources. You can speak English. We're not in Japan, neither we in China. Show up. Show up even if you feel like you are lonely. Show up to places that have resonance with you. If you're a person of faith and your thing is church, find a place that is close to you, and you'll never know. They have and outreach. I remember we used to go for camps as part of the school holidays when I was in high school, the last year here. And I'd be like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what camping looks like in Australia. But I said, you know what, let me give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? They're Christians. They cannot put me aside in a corner and forget me. And if they went to try and do canoeing, I joined them. If it was to try and help with the barbecue, I asked them, what is a barbecue? What are lamb chops? Because, you know, in Kenya, there's nothing like lamb chops. It's either sheep, kodo, or it's beef, or it's cow. But I think just immerse yourself, yeah? And if you get to be in this country for all of 2 years as a master's student, or 3 years or 4 years as an undergraduate, wouldn't life be more, I can call it, full of taste and character if you have immersed yourself in the culture? Don't sit at home and wait for it to come to you. I would say my outlook back then was, let me get out of my shelter and I will drag an Aussie friend with me from campus, but we will go out there and we'll try and have a good time.
Amazing. So this is where we now get into career, and as a person of color, how was it easier back then? And maybe give a background of what you studied and how was it easy to get into jobs in your career?
Okay. So when I came as I can call it a young student at 18. So primarily I was here to study, and I was fortunate enough to have sponsorship from home. So any work I did was just to make a little bit of pocket money on the side. So I did odd jobs like, you know, Christmases at Myers at the time was called Grace Brothers. I would help, there's a guy who actually sells, I think until today he does sell African curios and crafts at the Rocks Market in Sydney. That would be my weekend job. And what I realized what it did, without consciously thinking about it, it gave me confidence. Because if you're dealing with a client at Myers and they're busy having, you know, a moan about the fact that the stock is not available, or that they had to queue up long times before they can get served, it gave me social skills. And it takes me out of the cocoon of going, my accent is different, my skin is different, my face is not white. But you know what? I am there to serve. And I just believed that, and that's my actual belief till today, we don't come in the same package. God has designed us the way we are designed. As long as you have self-confidence and you take yourself out into the fore and you can be able to speak about yourself and your attributes. So I did economics. I majored in economics as my bachelor's degree. And I remember at the end of uni, I was like, what will I do with economics? It was one of those conversations where I always say, if I was to turn back time, it would be a good thing to rehash from the beginning. What course are you coming to Australia to do? And how does that convert into actual employment? So at the time I had a working permit, so that was not an issue for me. And what I did was, after my job at Myers, and that was the Christmas of 1999, so I'll just date myself, I decided I would go online and look for jobs. And so my first account I opened up with my money from Kenya to be able to transact and for my school fees to be sent to was a Commonwealth Bank. And I remember when I was on the Commonwealth Bank site, there was this thing that popped up. It was called Comsec. The full name is Commonwealth Security. It's a subsidiary of the Commonwealth Bank. And at the time, there was what we call the .com era. Tech stocks were all the rage. And I remember at the time going, I really think, first and foremost, I can talk, yeah? So that is a given. I have finished with a degree and we just gone through the Olympics. And I was, you know, for me, I was like, nothing can stop me. So I applied for a job with Comsec. And at the time, I think they were just looking for numbers because their trading business was growing in leaps and bounds. Everyone wanted to invest in the stock market, and they needed client service officers to take calls and place trades for everyday moms and dads and people on the street. And I can talk. My interview was very interesting. In fact, I remember feeling like this is the first corporate role I shall apply for.
So before we go to the interview, so was it the only job you applied?
It was the only job I applied because I had just finished with the Myers Christmas deal.
Wow.
And I just thought, okay, what I'll just do, now I'll move to something that's a little bit more professional. And because of the brand awareness, because I'd banked with them, I just thought, let me give it a shot.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was just something like as simple as an ad saying, we just need customer service officers to take calls and to help us with our trading platform. So I applied for the job, and I remember I was interviewed by a guy called Scott Dunn. I have never forgotten him to this day. And so I rock up, and I'm Nora who's like, early 20s and feeling like the world can do me no wrong. And when I walked into the interview, we didn't even discuss my degree, or we didn't discuss where I like, just the intricacies of like, and what are your competencies.
Yes.
He just wanted to know my soft skills. So he started asking me, so where are you from originally? And I said, I'm from Kenya. I grew up in Nairobi. I went to school in Nakuru. And now I have studied, I've finished my degree. I have gone through summer at Myers. And this is the first job I'm trying to apply for. What's the gig? And he says, oh my goodness, I went to Kenya for a safari.
Oh, wow.
So my whole interview was around Kenya and its amazing aspects around safaring. And I was like, am I in the wrong space? I even thought maybe he's not taking me seriously.
Yeah.
But then I think what he was doing was trying to figure out, like, can you speak to a subject?
Yes.
Are you able to engage, not just the one answer questions? Are you confident in yourself? Can you articulate the things that you're passionate about? And I didn't realize I was passionate about Kenya until then. So I was like, oh yeah, when we were young, we would go to the Mara, not as much as I guess Africans or Kenyans should, but we had been. And so we talked about it. And at the end, he was like, okay, this job is starting off and we're hiring quite a few people. And we'll come back to you. So there I was going, maybe I've just missed the mark. And so I caught my bus in Martin Place. And when I walked off to catch my bus, I was like, maybe this thing will not work out. I might need to kind of be more focused for my next interview. And on the bus ride home, I got a call. When can you start? So I started my first job on Valentine's Day, 2000.
So how was that now, getting into such a career? Never practiced, never been in anything like it. How was that?
So I was daunted by the first concept of like, now I have to, it's like, somebody made this statement the other day. You feel like you have the imposter syndrome. Like, am I qualified to do this?
Self-doubt.
Although when I think back, Comsec had a really good training program. So they had a team dedicated to training staff. So for the first week, we were inducted on like, what is the stock market? What is, a share? What is the minimum amount you can purchase? What is a stock option? And future. And so I just was like in a crash course. And so for me, I just went, if these people can invest in me, all I need to do is apply myself to it. And secondly, I remember thinking, I've never been knocked back in my life. I mean, it's called the power of positive thinking. Norman Vincent Peale. Yeah. When you step into a space, it doesn't matter whether you've never had experience, Australian experience, or even Kenyan experience in a Kenyan job. Come with your head held high. Come with the confidence that applies when you have done your homework and your research. Come expecting a positive outcome. And the rest will work itself out.
Amazing. We're going to continue the career, but right there, I just want you to touch on a very sensitive, it's not really sensitive, but we find that migrants coming in actually a bit, they sort of are not really confident. That's what I'm trying to point out. But if you look at the locals here, even if they don't have the much experience needed, they're very confident. What are you going to point out? What message do you have for our migrants, brothers and sisters, who come here and think they're not good enough and they have all the experience?
Okay. I will say what you need to do is think about your circle of friends, maybe who you hang around. Make sure not only exclusively hanging out with people from Kenya or people from Somalia or people from Cameroon if you happen to be in those cohorts. Find a range of people to hang out with, because I think when you're outside of your comfort zone, people will challenge how you think. Secondly, I used to be a shy human being in my previous life. And one of the soft skills I had to work on was public speaking. And things like Toastmasters or being part of the Rotary clubs, even being part of your church and stepping up there to make announcements or to moderate a wedding. Like the other day I was an MC at a wedding. If you asked me when I started off my journey in Australia, whether I had the ability to articulate myself, I would say clearly not, because I didn't look like the Aussies. I never knew how to ask for a job opportunity. I never knew how to ask for a job raise. And let me tell you, self-doubt, it self-multiplies, because when you think you're not competent, you sit in your corner and then people pass you by who are less competent than you. And it kind of compounds this whole theory of, I'm not Aussie, I don't have an Aussie accent, and therefore they will never consider me for this role. On the flip side, I look at kids who are born in Australia, and I keep on saying, I think how we were conditioned as young kids growing up does flow into our adulthood. You're told to sit in the back of the class, never put your hand up, never ask questions. So to me, I always say practice. Practice where you're uncomfortable. If it's to do an interview rehearsal, find an Aussie friend who you might have met maybe as your neighbor, or who you could have met probably as a friend, and just say, I'm going for an interview. Give me a few pointers as to what I could do differently. Yes. But me always think in life, you need to have your own self-belief and keep on knocking on doors. A door will open. But if you doubt yourself, you just need to sit yourself down and ask yourself, if you've come all this way, you've gotten that visa, initial visa, you've struggled through school and night shifts and day shifts to pay off that school fees. Who are you to stop yourself from stepping into your destiny? So me always think it's not something that happens overnight, but you need to keep on practicing, and you need to keep on surrounding yourself with people who make you bolder, who push you out of your cocoon, and who will ask you, if you miss this opportunity, you look back in 10 years' time and you'll be like, my door closed because I never even understood my potential. Yeah. Welcome back.
So thank you, Nora. So now in your career, what are some of the challenges, and how far, or did you stay in Comsec all this time, or did you change between jobs, and what are some of the challenges you encountered?
Okay. So I stayed in Comsec for a good, I think 3 years, and I was in different parts. So every 12 months I do assessment. I came in as an entry level, another opening is coming up, people are getting to be either seniors in the team or moving into a different division that was now Comsec lending. So it was more margin lending, and I used to apply for jobs because at this point, as I said, I'm young, and you come in and the floodgates is like, okay, entry-level jobs, then how do you level up to a more challenging and better rewarding role? So I lasted 3 years, and then after the 3 years, because I am a nomad, a few Aussies used to say at this time that there was an opportunity that you could get to travel to the UK as an Aussie and do a reciprocal visa, work holiday visa. And they said, you have to do this before you turn 30. So I just went, okay, so I've bought myself my first car.
So before, so that someone can understand, when you say an Aussie, maybe someone missed out.
Okay, an Australian.
An Australian. Yes. How did you get to be an Australian before now? Just
okay.
We're trying to get people to understand now the whole.
Okay. Yes. So a bunch of Kenyans at the time, by the time we were graduating in 2000, you had the opportunity to apply for permanent residency. And right then, there was a shortage of skilled migrants. So permanent residency comes in as step one into the system as a permanent resident. And then within about 2 years and a bit, you could apply for citizenship. So now, within that period now, I then have become what I am calling the Aussie, an Australian citizen.
Was it hard back then to just become a permanent resident of Australia?
I think as long as you qualified from your education and from your age, there was a vast opportunity.
Amazing.
Yes.
Okay. Now we go back to going to the UK.
So when I hear the Aussies talking about, and this, when I say Aussies, I mean Australians, talking about how they get to take time out to go and live and work in the UK and travel, I just went, before I buy a place, because at the end of the day, I'm just going, before you overcommit, why not have the experience of traveling the world? And when I grew up in Kenya, the farthest we could go from probably Nairobi was Nakuru, and then the farthest from there was Eldoret and back. So I said, let me take that opportunity up. I applied for my visa. I had my my cash savings to show that I could support myself. And off I went to the UK, much to my parents' can I call it surprise and almost like freaking out, going, what is this our daughter going to do in the UK? I remember Mzee asked once, he told me, when you get there, what are you planning to do? And I said, I'll find a job. And so I had a sibling there, so I was going to have free accommodation when I landed. Yeah. But I knew I could do anything. And it wasn't about career. It was more like an experience of living somewhere that's not Australia and that is not Kenya either. So went into London first and then to a place called Coventry near Birmingham, and then ended up doing roles in London, just, phone call customer service with NatWest, a bank, and then, Bank of Scotland. But in between, got to travel, visited Cyprus, visited Paris, visited Switzerland. And to me, now that I look at who I am right now, all these experiences just helped, I guess, build my character and make me realize just because I grew up in Kenya doesn't limit me to experiences that we were defined by at home. Now that I'm in a new environment, the Romans are traveling. Let's see what traveling does to you. And then you learn how to budget. You learn how it is to put yourself in front of people for a job. You learn how, when the money is running out, to be resourceful. But at that point in my life, I was quite young and adventurous. And so when the 2 years wrapped up, I came back to Sydney. And I decided Sydney felt like it was not quite offering me what I needed in terms of an opportunity to invest in property. And also, truth be told, I had lived there from when I had originally arrived. And with this nomad spirit, I decided I was going to check out Melbourne. So I have a cousin who lives in Melbourne, and she had moved here after her degree was completed from Perth. And whenever I would visit, I would be like, Melbourne is also cool. Like, you can afford a decent house, which is not as expensive as Sydney. I found the quality of life was a little bit better. So then I began my transition from Sydney to Melbourne. And then I did 10 years in Melbourne. And all this time, like, as I said, I'm negotiating. So I would work for a company called Leveraged in Sydney when I came back from the UK. And when I decided I want to transition to Melbourne, I just asked my boss, I'm like, I want to move for family reasons to Melbourne. Can I move to the office based out of Collins Street? If you don't ask, you never know. And so my boss was like, cool, just go do your job. And you will report to your same line manager, but you'll be based in Collins Street. So I moved. I kicked my goals in terms of my investment opportunities. And yes, this is life. If you don't ask, you don't know. And then for me, I think the way I look at myself now is never feel like a situation is permanent. If it's not serving your purpose, sit down, have a long chat with yourself, write down what your purpose is at that stage of your life. And if it's not being served, look for the next avenue.
Amazing. So you actually finished off that part of career and transition, going to the UK, coming back to Sydney, to Melbourne. And now we want to understand the biggest question we have today. Why return to Kenya?
Now, the $1 million question.
The $1 million
question. So when I hit the big 3-0, I remember saying to myself, I left Kenya very young. I left straight after high school. And every time I went to Kenya, I used to feel like there's something I missed out on being in Kenya as a young person. And as well, on the other side of the coin, my parents were getting a little bit older in their timeline. And so I used to always have at the back of my head, as much as I'm kicking my goals, these are, like, as I said, you get widgets, you get handbags, you get shoes, but you always kind of go, my experiences here don't eclipse the expectations I have of what I could be doing at home, as well as being close to family, specifically my parents, as they grow older. So 10 years after that, I got to a point in my career where I was feeling like right now, all I'm just doing is year after year doing performance reviews and not feeling like I'm getting challenged. And everyone would be like, change jobs. So you change jobs, you move from one company to the next. And maybe that nomad spirit of mine was just like, you know what? There's no better time now than to transition. So I made a call home and I just said to my folks, you know what? After all these years of being away, I would like to come and live in Kenya. I would like to plug into a family business that we have. And that for me was the purpose behind the relocation. On a secondary note, I told myself as well, if I continue doing the same thing and not getting different results, either I will become somebody who's always a grumpy cat or who has something to moan about, whether it is the cold of Melbourne or it is the fact that I have to pay the parking fine or that the neighbors are making noise. Like when you're not happy, you're just not happy and everything around you kind of now has a negative vibe. So that was in 2019 at the start. I made a resolution. This year is my year. I'm going to do my uplift. And so I started talking to people who had relocated back to Kenya.
Before we get there, how was it received, the phone conversation with your parents? How was that received?
So in all honesty, by the time I was explaining that I wanted to relocate back home, my parents were actually happy. You know why? For the fact that they had a bunch of us kids and we all had progressively left for education and then never come back home. The story of many Kenyan families across the board.
Yep.
And so for them, they were like, at least somebody who will be back in Kenya. Not only are you back in Kenya, you're back in Kenya in Eldoret, which is where our farm is and where they currently reside because they have retired officially.
Yeah.
And because we had sort of many conversations in between, whereby the conversation was, we don't want to have a situation of a business that is running, and when the patriarch is no more, we have a gap. Yeah. And so for me, fortunately for me, it was a conversation that was a positive conversation.
Mm-hmm. So now let's walk this thing slowly now. You decide to go back. So how did you prepare yourself for going back to Kenya?
So back to the socials, I went online and I was checking out a few sites and a few forwards that I had received from people who had heard me talk about my intent to return. And there was a brilliant one from the US, and they were talking about what your mindset should be like when you're returning. And this is the one thing I will point out. They said something along the lines of, just remember you're not going on vacation. Yeah. You're going back, and even if you've saved, let's say $100,000 to set up yourself in Kenya, that money will disappear like vapor within 6 to 12 months of landing in Kenya. Because a lot of us who are returnees or hopeful returnees, we go back with, I will call it a false expectation that we need to prove to family or to friends that we made it in the West and that we are coming to live the high life and driving a V8 and taking flights to and from A to B and looking like money never runs out. And I came to the realization in my last few holidays to Kenya that the lifestyle that I live in the West is affordable because I earn dollars.
Exactly.
But when I go back to Kenya, it's an expensive lifestyle, especially in Nairobi. And it's not to say that I want a very bougie life, but if I want to shop in a very upmarket space, or I want to have my teeth done by a professional dentist, or I want to have physio on my knee, it's going to cost something, and significantly. If I happen to have had children by the time I'm relocating, private schools are expensive. You would like to belong to the club, go to the gym. You want to be able to, have all the mod cons, and it costs. The cost of living is pretty high. And when I'm on vacation for 3 weeks, I can afford to spend like money is not running out. But if I'm relocating to Kenya, one of the blogs said something along the lines of like there's the platinum parachute, the gold parachute, the silver one, and the bronze. So you need to figure out your budget. And when you now know what your budget is for the relocation, I decided to carry my personal effects, so at least I'm not starting from scratch, and understand what is a budget like in Kenya per month. And this is a budget not in Nairobi, in Eldoret. Yeah. And then I had to now work back. How much do I need to save? And then when I go back, am I announcing to everyone that I'm coming back? No. They say, come humbly, live and work privately. And then when you have your accolades, let that be the moment when people publicly celebrate you. So I think it takes discipline, and it also takes a degree of humility with any move. Because I also talk to people who are like, don't ship your stuff back. Just put it in storage, come back in 12 months and decide whether this thing works for you. If it doesn't work for you, relocate back to your comfort zone. But if it works, then you come and you ship your stuff over. But then another principle I've actually taken seriously in my current state of life is, if you want to be somewhere, immerse yourself. You don't need to straddle both sides of the divide. If one is not working, let's assume I go back and in 5 years it's not working, I still have the blessed opportunity of knowing I can change my circumstance then. But I wanted to go back and immerse myself 100%. So once I'd put my things on the high seas and I had said my goodbyes to my close friends and family here, I traveled a little bit, then I landed in Kenya end of 2019 with, just an expectation of everything will work out perfectly. Because I always think anything that you do, similar to when I started off my first job, don't go thinking about the hurdles. Do the mathematics, do the homework, but then when you get there, don't start complaining about traffic. You knew traffic was going to be there. And then meet people who are also like you, who have come back. They give you, a little bit of a tip on how to survive life in Kenya. And so that began my journey.
So now coming back, you've left whatever you've left, good life, culture, infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
How was that transition for you?
So initially, as I said, I went with I had thought about this thing for 10 years. So for me, it was not looking for the things I missed out on, I'll be missing out on, because I already mentally sort of calculated that, I know I'll be living up country. I didn't quite, and yes, I used to miss, the independence that I had here, and the fact that I could drive between here, like say, Albury, Wodonga, independently without worrying about what if the tire goes flat, or what if I run out of fuel. I just went in expecting that everything will work out for the good. Yeah. And then COVID hit. And it's like, I tell you in life, if you know the end from the beginning, there's so many things that you would worry about, but then you just roll with the punches. Yeah. I got in and I remember waiting for my things to be cleared, and then had a big whinge about now that I have arrived, trying to find a place that, felt like my Aussie home. But then it's not going to be Aussie ever. It's Kenya. So just deal with Kenya and what Kenya can offer. But they're good apartments. You can get yourself a good neighborhood. Everything is about adjusting. The same way that I had to adjust as a student and figure out my way in Sydney, however many years before, just meant when I'm going back, it would take me time to readjust. But then I found people like me. I found friends who had relocated 5 years before. I met returnees from the UK, from the US, not in Nairobi, but in Eldoret, on their farms, family farms, running business. And at the end of the week, you're trying to look for a plot. Guys are like, oh yes, we're doing a barbecue. Do you want to join us? And me, I always say, when you are also social, I'll put it that way, avail yourself. If there's a meeting, avail yourself. If you hear there's somebody who is looking for the things you're looking for, just hang out with them a bit and you understand whether your value systems are the same. But then I found a cohort of people who look like me, and that they could understand that if I want to get a nice kettle to boil my water, where do I buy that one? And I would be taken to where you buy it. And it's home. At the end of the day, instead of thinking that my name was different or my skin was different, now I could get a hairstylist who could do my hair every weekend. I could eat organic food. I could visit my parents. I could go to the shamba and at 3 p.m. I'm done. I drive back into town. So my life was a different vibe, but I think I was ready for that season of change.
So now let's talk about what took you to Kenya. So the business.
Yes.
But before that, I want to ask this question, because if I don't ask this question, I'll kick myself. What was the biggest culture shock going back to Kenya? Just one.
Okay. Biggest culture shock. Man, there's so many. I think for me, I will say, as a woman, at the stage of life I am at, people want to put me in a box, and I don't fit into any box in our culture. And I'll start off by this. You're in a meeting and decisions are being made, or we have a delegation who have come in from Nairobi to see what we're doing at the shamba, and they expect that maybe you, as a woman, are there to sort of direct people towards where the catering is happening, or to do the diversity and inclusive picture. And I'm very vocal. At this stage of my life, I believe for everything that I've gone through and the fact that I've come back to Kenya, I am at a table and I need to be understood, and I need to articulate what will work for Kenya agripreneurs whilst I am on the ground. So that was my biggest culture shock. It was being relegated to a seat I was not going to take. And so for me, that has been, and will continue to be, the thing that I pray for grace and for wisdom. And at the end of the day, I get amazing feedback from people who are like, so you mean you can speak your thoughts so clearly? And I'm like, what else would you expect?
Amazing. So agribusiness, how's that going? What is agribusiness? And how did you fit in after coming from now, all that life in Australia? How did you fit in and start doing agribusiness?
Okay. So agribusiness, the way I'll define it, is not business that is done as a hobby. It's actually a commercially viable project, and it's for profit. Yeah. So with where I come from, so I come from Eldoret, and that's on the GISHU. It's in the GISHU County. Our shamba is in a place called Moiben. It's been renowned for many, many centuries as I'll call it the breadbasket of Kenya. So we are the major grain producers, us and Trans Nzoia. And what else do we do? A lot of dairy farming. So it has always been what the white settlers did. And then for the Kenyans who bought into farms, that's what they did. But I believe within the transition of time, a lot of the younger generation went into professions and therefore moved from the land to Nairobi and then to diaspora, because that is what we studied. We saw. Yes. And I remember even just thinking when I was young, we used to go, I'll call it shags, for Christmas, and I'd be like, oh my God, there's nothing happening here, because it was very rural, you know. Yeah. You even want to get, a SIM card replacement, you would struggle for that. Or even, let's even talk about SIM card replacement. It used to be like even having a phone line to your house at the shamba was unheard of. Yeah. So fast forward, I think what has happened over the years, especially with devolution in Kenya, is every county is empowered with a local government that promotes industries that create revenue, create jobs. And within this cohort is now what we call agribusiness. And now what we're doing is high value crops. So it's what we do, avocados, there is tea, there is coffee, there are macadamias. And then as a family business, we also have cut flowers, but that is a specialist role. But the first four is what our county is pushing farmers to do, to transition from the grains and from cereals into these high value crops, because it's a better revenue earner and it's something that is solid.
How did you fit in? That's where now I want us to point in, because coming from Australia, I don't think did you have any background in agribusiness?
No.
And how did you transition now to get into agribusiness? Okay.
So I would say I'm fortunate enough to have a parent, or at least my parents, who agreed the fact that when I come back home, I'm not going to look for employment. That's one thing I actually consciously made my mind up about. I said, there's a high unemployment issue or underemployment in Kenya. So why am I leaving jobs in Kenya, in Australia, to come and now jam up the market in Kenya? So when I was relocating back, I just said, what I'd like to do is come back and be a part of this family business and learn. it's almost like you learn by being is it a mentee? Yeah. And so when I came into the business, Zay was like, okay, you know what? The flower side is already established because flowers have been running for almost 25 years, going on 26. And so he was like, there is a startup of the avocado business because the first trees were planted in 2017. And he said, come in and you will be immersed in that. But there's no defined role. So because I'm a confident human being, I said, okay, Mzee, I'm here. What I do well is I communicate well. And I think from my strengths in the jobs I have done, the one thing I can do is try and look for markets. Because not only do we do fresh avocados, we also do seedlings for the actual startup farms. And then we're looking to do value addition for oil and things like pulp from the avocados that don't make to export. There's no clear-cut path. It's just like I showed up in a business and I can tell you operations, there's a manager who runs the operations. I wouldn't say I'm an operations person. In fact, sometimes people tell me, Nora, how are you talking about agriculture so passionately? But what I think I can do within the scope of our business is promote our business within county government, national government, and also overseas markets. My name is Nora Cheserem. I am the marketing manager from Equator Avocados, Kenya Limited. We're located in Eldoret, Moiben. Eldoret is well known for runners, but in this highlands as well, we have a lot of other potential. And right now, we are 3 years into growing avocados. We grow exclusively lamb Hass Avocados. We are growing these organically. We are looking to produce these and ship them out to the world. Our target markets will be Europe, to the UK, UAE, Russia, and hopefully even the Asian lands, including China. This project was birthed out of an idea that we have for many years grown wheat and maize, but we're looking to add value and also to be able to put something on your plate that gives you health and well-being. So a lot of the people that work on our particular farm probably would have struggled with at least even finding employment in the past. But given that this is a good cash crop and it's something that will be potentially here and that we will continue to harvest up to 60 years from now, so 2080, we're hoping that we can be able to empower our community and also empower our women by virtue of giving them jobs and giving them an opportunity to do something good to be able to bring up good crops. Now, Hass avocados are high butter content. They're also able to travel a long distance into Europe well. But most importantly, it brings you healthy benefits to you as a consumer. So if you want to be able to get in touch with us, we are equatoravocadoskenya.co.ke, or you can just look us up on IG, so both Instagram or Facebook, Equator Avocados Kenya, and I'll be more than happy to just circle back with information as what we can provide, fresh fruit, and potentially virgin pressed oils starting 2021. That's the summer of 2021. And one of my experiences in 2022 is I went for a fair in Berlin because I wanted to understand. You know, they say we Kenyans, we jump into things without understanding the end game. Yeah. So when people are doing quails, we all go into quails not understanding what does a quail equate to at the end? What does the consumer want? So I remember in my foraging and trying to find my purpose and my position, I put a title on myself. I said, I call myself marketing director. Because you know what? You name it and you claim it.
Exactly.
Yeah? And so I went to Berlin and I remember walking around the show and asking myself, do we understand our capacity as Kenya to fill this gap of fresh fruit and vegetable in Europe without cutting corners, without trying to say we will do the bare minimum at the farm, and then when our fruit gets rejected at the market, we start whinging that, you know, because we're Africans, we're disadvantaged. And now because I had had my Australian experience, none other than me, everyone sitting in the Kenya hub, because the Kenyan stand within the African region, I just said, I didn't come to meet Kenyans. I came to see what the Colombians are doing, what the Peruvians are doing, what people are from New Zealand are doing, what South Africans are doing. So I went around the show and it was quite revealing that we don't understand our capacity. Secondly, I think our confidence to be able to speak business to business sometimes is compromised because we think we are not equal measure at the table with the buyers. And it takes building relationships. It takes Kenya also having a messaging that is, we produce fruit and veg, and we're compliant, and we're bringing vegetables this year, and we're planning to bring more next year. We're consistent in what we do. So to the original question you asked me, how did I make that transition? I have been every day waking up and asking myself, what do I do to understand more about the markets? So I'm online, I am learning. I visit other farms if I get opportunities. I'm part of the Avocado Society of Kenya board. I talk to people who are who have been doing this for 20 years before me. I have met women who are doing startups. I went to a show run by Kakuzi. Kakuzi is like the biggest renowned avocado exporter in Kenya at Murang'a, and I went for their open day. And I remember just when I was there with my gumboots, and I'm asking myself, whenever did I imagine I would ever like give up the posh shoes and wear gumboots and be on the shamba? But then I actually said, people don't discover their own country because they always think people who end up as farmers are people who never made it in school.
And poor.
Yeah, and poor. And I met old people driving nice cars, wearing very nice clothing, who didn't look like they were strugglers. And I said, you see, if these guys have figured out their story and we're just coming on board as UASIN GISHU, what can I personally do to help bridge that divide? And so I've been trying to always build my networks. Kenya has really good government support. So there's a group called Keproba. They were running like a training program on branding. So we didn't have a brand. And I was like, okay, I'll get into this and try and look at what our logo will look like, what our brand, what our social media footprint will look like. And so every day I'm doing stuff, but I'm just trying to do what is required. And then when it comes together beautifully. And I'm hoping that one day I can encourage other people. Like, you know, we left home for whatever purpose and our own journey. It is important that at the end of a season that you have also given back to the land where you came from. So that is probably a high-level explanation of my journey so far into agribusiness.
Is now you've transitioned, now you've seen the potential of avocados. So what are your future plans and what are you seeing yourself achieving with this avocado business?
Okay. So with regard to our family business, I just want to kind of influence a little bit of structure, and I will call it legacy planning, because when I travel through different businesses in Kenya, I think the founder starts off with a vision and then we build on that vision. So for us as a farm and as a business, we're looking at training people who want to do startups of avocado farms within our region, so UASIN GISHU and the surrounding regions. I would like to also do the value addition prospect, because a lot of our challenge is like 20% of our crop doesn't make it to export market, and you cannot get to waste 20% of our resources every year. So do the value addition. I also believe that there is a great opportunity to do CSR, so corporate social responsibility, by giving back to our local community. So schools, educating kids, you know what, don't go and start all applying to be architects. Why not try and do horticulture or farming and think about, or even something as simple as value chain. How do you do logistics? Think about where you come from. What are the things that you could learn that you can come and implement? And wherever you are, whether you're in Kenya or whether you're in an overseas space, when you travel the world, come back home for a vacation, whether it's 3 months or 3 weeks, you have an opportunity to make an impact where you first came from. What can you do to make a difference in that community? And that also creates jobs. For me as an individual, I also want to be part of the current administration. They're really pushing the agenda of agriculture, because there's a whole conversation around the fact that there's a lot of unemployment and white-collar jobs are only limited. Yeah. But if we can ramp up agribusiness, we can create sustainable jobs, and especially for the young people in the rural parts of Kenya. And then also open up to agritourism. I met an amazing family from a place called Moiben, and they're opening up like an avocado farm, but they're going to make it like a function center as well. So when you fly in from Australia, instead of staying in the city center, they'll have cabins, and then you can hang around a lake that's around the dam, a dam, which will be rehabilitated and made like pretty cool. And this guy kept talking about agritourism, and I'm like, that reminds me of Australia. I used to go to the Hunter Valley when I was a student, and I'm like, they're grape growers, but they've begun an agribusiness or tourism business around that, yeah? And because we come from very rushed lives in the West, when I come back home, I don't want to go to Nairobi. I want to be somewhere where it's clean air, it's organic food, it's teaching maybe the next generation. This is where our origin was started, or where our original parents came from. And Kenya is cool. Farming is cool. Life at home is sustainable if we look at what God has given us and we can make the best of it.
Amazing. So before we go to final remarks and advice to young people, whether overseas, back home, all that and returning to Kenya, was it worth it?
That is the $1 million question I said before. For me, my personal journey, it is worth it. And the reason being simply this. Every season of your life, you have different goals. Yeah. What is your outlook for your 20s? Your education? Cool. Come study. Finish what you came to do. In your 30s, aggregate at least your wealth, or rather start off by having an investment, because you can't leave without having proven at least I have this nest egg. If everything goes to mush, I have a backup for myself. But then now from where I am in my journey, and this is, I guess, my story, whenever I'd go back home, over the last, say, 5 years, I would meet people who look like me, who went to school with me, who never left Kenya. And yet when I go home, there's like their impact and their effectiveness is quite astounding, you know. And they're like, and I'm running a school for underprivileged kids in my shags. And me, I'm asking myself, the only thing I can do is rub two coins together and kind of buy them bread. So if I have life in me, and before I get to retirement, have I served my purpose in Australia? If I feel like I have served my purpose in Australia, and maybe in my mind I've always thought where I feel happiest is Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, I will work towards a project that will make me have a purpose when I go back. And I'm not going to spend my money on only holidays and buying curios and sending money for people to go to buy shopping.
A holiday.
I will provide for them an agribiz hub. We could do dania, we could do herbs, tarragon, we could do saffron and dry it and export it. And by doing so, we empower people to be self-sufficient. But then I think at the end of the day, I think it comes down to your personal outlook on life. Like, what is your goal? Where are you at? And then my ultimate motto or mantra in my mind is, when you feel like you have maxed out your credit in a space, don't stop and think your life is over. Just take check and figure out what else is in your quiver. What else can you use? And I always say, where we are in our lifetime in Kenya, we have a new administration. Everyone will talk about the positives and the negatives. But I feel like there's a lot of good purpose. I think there's a lot of young people in positions of governance. The other day I was looking at meeting up with the current visiting team from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs. And they are truly dead set aware that diasporans have a lot to offer Kenya. And you might not live in Kenya, but you can be a consultant. You might not live in Kenya, but you can be a business-to-business contact. You might not live in Kenya, but you could set up a foundation and send laptops to schools to teach kids that, you know what, in Australia, Farmers, actually the rich people, the rest of us in the cities are working just to pay mortgages. Change your mindset. That I would say, I think one, when you decide to relocate, I think financially you really need to figure out your game plan. That's critical because there's a lot of financial stress if you don't do that. 2, surround yourself with people who've either done that transition or who are willing to support you in your transition years. And then 3, stay humble. I think one of the best things about Australia, and even right now, this vacation as I am here has taught me, Australians don't show their wealth on their sleeve. If you need to go and live with your folks in their granny flat for 6 months as you set yourself up, do that. No one should be able to give you judgment over that. If it means you have to stay with siblings or you have to go and downsize and not live in a 3-bedroom house, start off where you need to start off from, because you get one chance at success. And then I also say, at the end of the day, positivity. Like, just come in with an expectation of a good outcome. Do your research and network. Find the people that have done what you're doing. The other day I was talking to an American who's relocating from North Carolina, coming to Leaseland in Kenya to grow vegetables and export it. I was asking him, are you seriously moving from the US as an American to come and live in rural Kenya to farm? And he says, where I've reached my life, this is what will give me purpose. And so I said, if an American can do it, why not us Kenyans who have come out into diaspora? We come from a great country. So I always say, for me, coming really early in my formative years made me think like, I'm leaving behind hardship and places that doesn't serve my purpose. But as I think I went through my stages of life, I discovered that look at a glass as half full, never half empty. And for every challenge in Kenya, there is an opportunity. If you work in a nursing home or you work in healthcare, how about you come and set up a business like that in Kenya? How about you come and connect with people who are business-minded when you're on vacation? I always say, to whom much has been given, much is expected. So don't live your life like it is just about you and your consumption. What can you do to better those that shall come after you? Australia is an amazing country. I have so much love for this space and many of the values that it holds near and dear, but also stay true to yourself. Make sure you have a clear identity. Don't become what other people need you to look like or to feel like or to dress like. Decide what your purpose is, decide what your mission is, and give life a red hot crack. You're only here once to do all that. Thank you for watching and have a good day.